I didn't expect a front row seat. I didn't expect a toast. I didn't even expect a nod in my direction. But when my own brother looked me in the eye 2 weeks before his wedding and said, "You're not successful enough to be best man," something inside me just shut off. I nodded, calmly, quietly, like he hadn't just torn open the last thread I'd been holding on to for years. And then I sat exactly where I was told to sit, in the very back row of the most expensive wedding I'd ever helped fund. I watched as the guests poured in, all dressed in their polished silk suits and imported perfumes. I saw the string quartet tuning softly beside the altar. I noticed the engraved initials on every napkin, the 6-tier cake that looked more like an art exhibit than dessert, and the floral arches that cost more than my pickup truck. And I remembered every dollar, every quiet favor, every time I'd pulled him up from nothing. Now, he didn't want me standing beside him. I was apparently the kind of success that didn't look good in photos. Let me take you back. It was a Saturday afternoon when he called. His voice was unusually stiff, like he was reading off a script someone else had written. "Hey, listen, I wanted to talk to you about the wedding." I was smiling when I answered, still holding the draft of the best man speech I'd been working on for a week. I thought he might be asking me to help with rehearsal or double-check the guest list. "We've decided we're going with Mark as best man." I blinked. "Mark?" "Our cousin, the one who couldn't be trusted with car keys, let alone a microphone." "Yeah, I mean, he fits the vibe better. The suit, the connections, you know, business stuff. It's what Harper's parents are expecting." He said it like he was sparing me, like removing me from his side of the altar was doing me a favor. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't remind him of how I used to carry him on my back when he scraped his knees, or how I gave up college to run Dad's business after the accident, or the time I paid off his debt to keep his first business from collapsing. Instead, I just listened. And when he finally mumbled, "Hope you're not too upset. It's not personal," I swallowed the ache rising in my chest, and I said, "Don't worry. I'll be there. Let me know where you want me to sit." He hesitated. Then he said, "We've got you at table 18, back corner, beside the bar. I thought you'd be more comfortable there." Comfortable. I laughed when I hung up. The kind of laugh that comes out when you realize the person you'd die for doesn't think you're even worth standing beside. On the day of the wedding, I arrived early, not to mingle, not to cause a scene, just to sit. I wore a dark navy suit, not tailored, but clean. I brought my own tie, no matching groomsman colors for me. I sat down, quietly, hands folded in my lap, and watched as the room filled with people who had no idea who I was. The MC called for the wedding party to enter. One by one, the groomsmen strutted down the aisle. Mark gave a wink to the crowd like he was a movie star. Then came my brother. He looked sharp, no doubt. Custom suit, perfect hair, smile like a politician. He passed right by me and didn't even glance in my direction. I didn't flinch. I didn't wave. I just watched. From the seat I was assigned. From the role I'd been given. And I'll be honest, for a second, it broke me. But only for a second. Because what my brother didn't know, what none of them knew, was that by the end of the night, someone else at that wedding would be handing me something far more powerful than a microphone or toast. A folder, a signed contract, and the truth. And when it landed in my lap, he would finally have to look me in the eye again. And this time, it wouldn't be from the altar. It would be from the bottom. Before there were tuxedos and tailored suits, before there were guest lists and champagne towers and image management, there were just two boys in a small, creaky house on the edge of Maplewood Street. Me and my brother Ben. I was 10 when our mother passed away. Ben was 4. He was too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to know she was gone. I still remember the way he clung to my leg at the funeral, burying his face into my trousers like they were armor. Our dad, he wasn't the hugging type. He was a hard man, the kind who showed love by fixing things, not saying things. So that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was still full of silent casseroles and colder silences, it was me who held Ben while he cried himself to sleep. That was the night I stopped being his brother and started being something more. I was the one who packed his school lunches, who learned to braid the fraying laces on his sneakers when he wouldn't let anyone else touch them. I was the one who taught him how to tie his tie for middle school graduation, the one who cheered louder than anyone when he won his first high school basketball game. I never missed a game, not once, even if it meant leaving work early and getting scolded by Dad for coddling him. I didn't care. He was my kid in every way that mattered. And back then, he knew it. Back then, Ben would crawl into my room on stormy nights and whisper, "You think Mom would be proud of me?" And I'd always answer the same way. "She already is. And if she could see how kind you are, how hard you try, she'd be prouder than ever." Because he was. Ben was soft-hearted and loyal and always thinking 10 steps ahead. And me? I was the anchor, the one who steadied the boat so we could sail. After high school, when our dad got sick, Ben wanted to delay college to help with the business. But I wouldn't let him. "You go chase the dream," I told him. "I'll hold down the fort." He hesitated. He looked back, even as he boarded that train to Chicago. And I stood there on the platform, hands in my pockets, heart in my throat, watching the only person I'd ever really protected ride away from everything we'd known. I thought that was the hardest day of my life. I was wrong. Because nothing, not the missed holidays, not the distance, not even the months of silence, nothing hurt as much as realizing that somewhere along the way, I'd been edited out of the story. He came back 3 years later, graduated with a business degree, and that new kind of confidence people wear like cologne. It lingers in the air and changes how people see you, even when nothing's changed inside. At least that's what I thought. He still hugged me at the train station, still called me Big Bro, still stayed in his old room for a while and helped out around the shop. But slowly, things began to shift. He started wearing cufflinks, stopped showing up to Sunday barbecues, started saying things like, "You gotta think bigger, man," and "That kind of works for grinders, not visionaries." At first, I thought it was just growing pains. Everyone changes, right? But then he met Harper. Harper was charm dipped in pearls, the kind of woman who never raised her voice but could silence a room with a glance. She was raised in the kind of family that taught etiquette instead of emotion, the kind that hosted silent auctions instead of birthday parties. The first time she came to our house, she smiled politely, touched nothing, and said, "It's so authentic." Authentic. I didn't know if that meant old or small or just not worth renovating. Ben beamed when she said it. He looked at her like she was the horizon. And suddenly he was sprinting toward it, away from everything he'd once held sacred. He started dressing like her father, talking like her brother, and walking like someone who forgot where the cracks in the pavement used to be. I watched it happen, slowly, quietly, like a ghost watching the living forget him. And yet, I supported it, every single bit of it. When he asked to borrow $25,000 for a down payment on a condo they both liked, I wired it without hesitation. When he said his startup needed a quick loan to survive the first winter, I offered him my savings, without asking for papers or terms. Because I believed in him, because I was proud of him, because deep down, he was still the same boy who used to ask if Mom would be proud, and I couldn't be the one to say no. But something strange happened after every gift, every loan, every sacrifice. He got quieter, colder. He stopped calling me Big Bro and started calling me by my name. Once, at a cocktail party hosted by Harper's parents, I heard him tell one of her cousins, "Oh, him? He's in trades, build stuff." No mention of the business I'd kept alive for 15 years. No mention of the man who bought him his first suit. Just a vague, dismissive shrug. That night, I sat in my truck for an hour before starting the engine. Because I knew he had outgrown me. Or at least, he thought he had. But I didn't say a word. Because loyalty isn't loud. It just keeps showing up. Until it's told not to. It wasn't one moment. It was a slow drift. Like watching someone you love sail into a fog, waving at you from the deck, not realizing they've already turned their back. Ben's world started changing the moment Harper said yes. Not just to dating him, to everything. The invitations, the introductions, the whispered approvals behind polished crystal glasses. Harper's family wasn't rich in the showy way. They were the kind of people who inherited silver, not bought it. The kind of people who called vacation homes cottages and believed small talk was an Olympic sport. They hosted garden parties in May, wine tastings in July, charity galas in the fall, where silent auctions were louder than any conversation we ever had growing up. Ben loved it. He loved the way waiters in tuxedos pulled out chairs for him, how Harper's father shook his hand, like he was already part of the club. He started wearing loafers without socks, calling our old neighborhood the old part of town, and talking about me like I was a technician, not the man who raised him. The first time I met Harper's family was at her mother's birthday brunch. They held it at the Bellevue Country Club, the kind of place where even the sunlight seemed filtered through entitlement. I wore my nicest button-up shirt, pressed the slacks I'd bought just for the occasion, and showed up 10 minutes early. I shouldn't have. No one else was early. And when they arrived, no one really noticed me. Harper's father, Donovan Caldwell, gave me one of those handshakes that's firm enough to assert dominance, but not enough to actually welcome you. He looked at me like I was an outdated appliance he didn't know how to get rid of. "So," he asked, swirling his mimosa, "Ben tells me you work with your hands?" I smiled. "Yes, sir. I run the business our father started. Custom renovations, commercial and residential contracts. Been at it 18 years now." "Ah," he nodded slowly, as if I'd just confessed something. "That's commendable. A trade. Nothing wrong with that. Important folks need folks who know how to install things. Install things. Like I was a plug." Harper's mother smiled tightly and said, "It's so lovely to see families supporting each other. So authentic." There was that word again. Authentic. The fancy way of saying simple. The velvet insult dressed up like praise. They spent the rest of the brunch talking about politics I wasn't familiar with, books I hadn't read, ski trips I couldn't afford. They laughed at things I didn't find funny, and paused just a second too long when I spoke, like my words had to be translated before they could be understood. I was seated at the far end of the table, next to the waitstaff service station. Every time someone refilled a glass or cleared a plate, I had to lean back and let them pass. I wasn't part of the conversation. I was furniture, just in the way. Ben didn't even notice. Or if he did, he didn't care. He was too busy trying on the version of himself Harper's family preferred. Polished, passive, non-threatening. By the end of the meal, I was just tired. tired of shrinking myself to make room for a world that had no intention of letting me in. The distance kept growing after that. Calls got shorter. Texts turned into, "Can't talk now, swamped." He started referring to Harper's father as a mentor. He joined a leadership group of entrepreneurs who spent more time at rooftop mixers than at their desks. One night, he posted a photo on Instagram, a group shot, all of them in matching black tuxedos, standing on a marble staircase like royalty. The caption read, "The New Era, Building Empires." I wasn't tagged. I wasn't even mentioned. That same week, I was fixing the foundation of an old house 2 towns over, covered in dust, sore from lifting beams, eating lunch out of a cooler in the front seat of my truck. I looked at that photo and thought, we are not in the same story anymore. Then came the engagement party. They rented out an art gallery downtown. It was elegant, expensive, catered by a chef I'd only ever seen on television. I walked in wearing a charcoal blazer I hadn't worn in years. I'd even had my boots polished. As I stepped in, I caught the tail end of Harper's laugh, floating like glass through the gallery. She was wrapped in champagne satin, holding a glass of something with gold flakes in it. Ben saw me and waved. "Glad you made it, man." Man. Not bro. Not big bro. Just man. The only seat available was at the back, right next to a collection of abstract sculptures, cold steel twisted into shapes that meant nothing. I sat. I smiled when people looked my way, but no one really looked. They glanced and moved on. At one point, I heard someone whisper, "That's his brother? The contractor?" Like I was a rumor. Harper's father gave a toast that night. "When I met Ben," he said, "I saw something rare. Ambition grounded in humility. Drive paired with discipline. I knew he'd be a man who could lead." Ben smiled. Everyone clapped, and I sat still, because the only man who'd ever taught Ben discipline was our father, and the only man who carried him when he couldn't walk wasn't in that room. But maybe that's how he wanted it. Maybe that was the point. That night I left without saying goodbye. Took the side exit. Drove home in silence. The stars were sharp. The sky was clean. And my chest ached in a way I hadn't felt in years. I had raised a boy who no longer saw me. Not as a brother. Not even as a man worth standing beside. But that was okay. Because people like Harper's family, people like her father, they may not respect hard work when it walks in wearing boots and rolled sleeves. But they understand power. And that was coming. It always starts with a small ask. A little favor. Something casual. Something couched in phrases like "just temporary" or "only until things smooth out." With Ben, it started 6 months before the wedding. He called one evening while I was closing up the shop. I had dust in my lungs, paint on my forearms, and receipts stuffed in my pocket from another long day on my feet. "Hey, man, got a second?" That phrase again. Man! Never brother. But I let it slide. "We're in escrow," he said. "Harper and I found the house we want. Beautiful place up in Kensington Ridge. 4 beds, a study, backyard with enough room for a pool someday." I smiled. Couldn't help it. "Sounds like a dream." "Yeah, it is. Only thing is..." He hesitated. "Only thing is we're a little short for the down payment." I leaned against the counter. My back was killing me. "How short?" 25, maybe 30. Thousand. Not dollars, not groceries, not gas money, but thousands. I didn't flinch. Not out loud, anyway. "You tried the bank?" "We did. Got approved for most of it, but Harper's dad. He thinks it'll reflect better on us if we close fast and clean." Of course. Perception was everything with them. "You'd get it back," he said quickly. "We'll roll it into the refinance in 6 months. I just need someone who believes in us." He said that part like it was a compliment, like my belief was something precious. And I'll admit, it worked. Because I did believe in him. I always had, even when I felt invisible, even when he left me in the shadows of his new life. I wired the money the next day. The next ask came 2 months later. He called during dinner. I had just cracked open a cold beer and reheated leftovers. Something simple after a 14-hour job in the valley. The business hit a hiccup, he said. Turns out their startup wasn't generating revenue yet. Their angel investor pulled out. They had payroll coming due. It's just a bridge loan. 2 or 3 months tops. We'll be profitable soon. This time he didn't even say, please. Just assumed I would. And I did. Because I was still clinging to the version of him I used to know. Over the course of a year, I gave him over $70,000. Some of it direct, some of it disguised, covering utility bills, loaning him the work truck when his Tesla wouldn't hold a charge, paying his insurance premiums just for this month. When Harper insisted they upgrade their appliances to host her parents for Thanksgiving, I covered the $5,800 charge to their credit card when they maxed out. They never even sent a thank you card. They said it at the time, sure. You're a lifesaver. We owe you big time. Couldn't have done it without you. But nothing that lasted longer than the breath it took to say it. I wasn't investing in them. I was enabling them. And I knew it. But I also knew I couldn't stop. Because if I stopped helping, I might lose what little connection I still had. And worse, if I stopped helping, I'd have to face the truth that they didn't love me anymore. They just used me. I didn't tell anyone about the money, not my accountant, not my cousin Rosa, not even my closest friend James, who'd been with me since we were kids. I told myself it was about privacy. But it wasn't. It was about shame. Because deep down, I knew what was happening. Ben wasn't borrowing from me. He was bleeding me, bit by bit, smile by smile, compliment by compliment. And I let it happen, because I couldn't bear the thought of being cut out completely. One afternoon I stopped by their new house, just dropped in, wanted to see the landscaping I'd paid for, wanted to see how the dream home looked in real life. Harper answered the door. She blinked like she hadn't expected me, like I'd walked into a part of the movie set I wasn't supposed to see. Oh, you didn't text? Thought I'd surprise you. Just in the neighborhood. Well, she hesitated. It's not a great time. I looked past her. Her parents were seated in the living room, sipping wine from glasses I'd seen online. Riedel Crystal, $90 a stem. Ben was laughing at something her father said. I took a step back. No problem. Just wanted to drop this off. I handed her the receipts, copies of the kitchen remodel expenses I'd covered at Ben's request. He said you needed them for the warranty, I said. She took them like they were wrapped in thorns. Right, thanks. That was it. Not, come in. Not, stay a while. Not even a handshake from her father. I wasn't family. I was a contractor who happened to be related. That night, I opened a spreadsheet. I started logging the numbers, every check, every transfer, every card I'd let him swipe. It totaled $106,800. I stared at that number for a long time. It was more than my father had made in his final 5 years of work, more than I'd saved for retirement, more than I'd ever spent on myself in a decade. And none of it came with strings attached. Because brothers don't need contracts. Right? That's what I told myself. But as the wedding approached and the invitations went out, and I was still seated at table 18, something in me shifted. I didn't get bitter. Not yet. But I stopped pretending it didn't hurt. Because the pain had a weight now, a name, and a price tag. There's a certain silence that only comes when your heart breaks quietly. No shouting, no crying. Just a moment where everything inside you folds in, as if your ribs are trying to protect what little is left. That's how it felt when Ben said the words. We've decided we're going with Mark as best man. It wasn't the words alone that did it. It was how he said them, like it was already settled, like it had been discussed weeks ago, like he was just now doing the unpleasant part, informing me of the decision, like it was a formality. I was in my shop that evening, organizing tools that hadn't seen sunlight in months. He stopped by unannounced. Harper waited in the car. He didn't sit, didn't look around, didn't ask how I was doing. Just stood by the door, hands in his jacket pockets, voice rehearsed. Mark's been helping a lot with the planning. He's connected, speaks well. You know how Harper's family can be. Image matters to them. I said nothing, because if I spoke too soon, my voice would betray me. You're still in the wedding party, of course. Table 18. You'll be surrounded by some of the guys. We just thought, given everything, you'd prefer to relax, not have to write a speech. I looked at him then, really looked, the way he kept glancing at the floor, the way his smile kept twitching like he wasn't sure it belonged on his face. Everything, I repeated. Yeah, you've had a lot going on, the business, the house. You probably don't want the stress. Stress. As if standing next to him would be a burden. I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind of smile a man wears when the knife goes in just deep enough, and he realizes it's not coming out. Of course, I said, voice level. It's your day. You should have it exactly the way you want. He nodded, relieved, like a weight had lifted. He never asked if I was okay. Never said he wished it could be different. Just said, appreciate you being cool about this. I knew you would be. You've always been solid. Solid. Like concrete. Something to stand on, walk on, never recognize or thank. I stood there, watching him walk back to the car, where Harper waited with her sunglasses on and a phone in her hand. They didn't wave goodbye. They just drove off. Later that night, I found the best man speech I had started 2 months earlier. It was saved in a folder on my laptop titled Ben's Big Day. I read through it slowly, like I was reading a letter from a friend I'd already lost. I've watched Ben grow from the boy who used to follow me around the yard with a toy, hammer to the man who now builds a future for himself, with a woman who clearly sees his worth. He's not just my brother. He's my proof that love, when it's real, can raise someone to their full height. I stared at those lines for a long time. Then I hit delete and watched the words disappear. The invitation arrived the next morning. Cream cardstock, gold trim. My name printed in a font that tried too hard to sound elegant. Dennis Flores, guest. Just like that. Not Dennis, best man. Not Dennis, brother of the groom. Just guest. No RSVP card was included. Everything had to be confirmed online. Streamlined, modern, polished. There was a link to the seating chart. Table 18, by the bar. Close to the back exit. Sandwiched between 2 guests I didn't know. I didn't tell anyone about the demotion. Not Rosa, not James. Not even Dad's old friend Roger, who still stops by the shop every Friday for coffee and talk about the Seahawks. Because the moment you tell someone you've been replaced, the world doesn't just see it. You feel it, again and again, like a second rejection every time someone says, wait, what? But I thought, so I stayed quiet. And I prepared for the day. Pressed my own suit. Bought a tie that matched the color scheme I saw on Harper's Pinterest board. Practiced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. The wedding was held at the Belmont Estate, an old mansion turned event space on the edge of town. Everything was perfect. The weather, the flowers, the seating, the guests. I showed up early, like I always did. Ben greeted me with a quick nod. Glad you made it. Glad. as if I'd RSVP'd to a business lunch, not his wedding. I was escorted to my table by a planner wearing a headset. She handed me a program. I opened it. Best man, Mark Ramirez. And then it hit me again. Not just the exclusion, but the finality of it. My name wasn't there. I wasn't in the photos, wasn't mentioned in the ceremony notes, wasn't part of the narrative. I was background noise at an event I had helped fund. And for the first time in my life, I let myself feel it fully. The betrayal, the erasure, the quiet humiliation. But it didn't break me. It clarified me. Because in that moment, sitting in the back, watching my brother thank everyone but me, I knew something he didn't. I had already been handed something far more valuable than a microphone or a title, a signed contract, and the keys to a future he wouldn't be invited into. It happened 2 weeks before the wedding. I had just finished wrapping up a full-day site visit on a mid-sized commercial job. Sweat clung to my back, my boots were caked in dried cement, and my forearms were sore from hauling equipment no one else could seem to lift properly. It was one of those days that reminded me why I still believed in work. Real work. The kind that leaves your fingerprints on something long after you've left. I was locking up the tool shed when I noticed a car parked out front. A silver Mercedes. Windows tinted. Sleek. Immaculate. Out of place. When I stepped around to the front, the driver's door opened, and out stepped Donovan Caldwell, Harper's father, dressed in an earth-toned sport coat, perfectly creased pants, and those expensive leather shoes that look uncomfortable, but cost more than a month's mortgage. He smiled as if we were old friends. "Dennis Flores," he said, extending a hand. "Appreciate you making time for me." I didn't, because he hadn't asked. Still, I shook his hand, firmly, once. "What can I do for you?" "Mind if we sit?" We didn't sit inside. We sat on a stack of lumber beside my truck, the sun dipping low behind the roofline. The sawdust clung to his jacket, but he didn't brush it off. That told me this wasn't a casual drop-in. It was intentional. "I wanted to talk to you about a business proposition." I didn't respond. I just waited. Because I've learned that the longer you wait, the more honest people get. "I've been watching you for a while now," he continued. "I know who you are. I've seen the permits you pull, the deadlines you meet. Your reputation in this city, it's solid." There was that word again, solid. But when he said it, it didn't feel like a dismissal. It felt like respect. "Ben tells me you don't take on partners," he said. "That true?" "Usually. But not always." It wasn't a question. He reached into a slim leather folder and pulled out a crisp sheet, letterhead embossed with the Caldwell family seal. "I'm starting a new real estate arm," he said. "Commercial spaces, multi-use structures. We've got the capital, the land. What we don't have is someone who can build, someone who knows the dirt, not just the drawing board." "And you're coming to me?" "I am. I studied him. This was the same man who barely acknowledged me at that brunch, who once asked what I installed for a living, who never looked at me long enough to form a full sentence. "Why me?" I asked finally. He didn't blink. "Because you're not flashy. You're efficient. You don't chase cameras. You hit your deadlines. And while my son-in-law is ambitious, he's not grounded. I've seen men like him before. Big talk, small follow-through." He paused. "You built something real, Dennis, and I respect that." I took a slow breath. Let the silence settle between us like sawdust in sunlight. Then he reached into his folder again and handed me a draft contract. 50-50 split. Guaranteed minimum on the first project. Option for expansion if successful. His signature was already there. "Think about it," he said, standing. "We can finalize things next week. But I'll tell you something. He looked at me then, not as Harper's father, not as a man with a country club membership, but as a businessman. There are a lot of people in that wedding who think success wears a bow tie, who think it speaks Latin, sips wine, and quotes literature. But success doesn't always walk in wearing polished shoes. Sometimes it pulls up in a truck, covered in sweat, and keeps its mouth shut until the work is done. And then he left. Just like that. No further explanation. No sales pitch. Because men like him don't make offers twice. I sat there on the stack of lumber long after he drove away. The offer sat in my hands. It wasn't just paper. It was power. The kind of power I'd never asked for, never begged for, never needed until now. And that's when I understood something. All this time, while Ben and Harper were chasing appearances, building a life in gold filters and curated captions, I had been building something else. Credibility, integrity, proof. 3 days later, I met with Donovan again. We signed the agreement over coffee at a small cafe near the river. No assistants, no lawyers, just two men with a pen and a shared understanding. He stood, shook my hand again, and said, "You'll make a hell of a partner. I don't care what table they seat you at." I smiled. Neither do I. I didn't tell Ben, didn't tell Harper, didn't tell anyone, because real power doesn't announce itself. It arrives exactly when it's meant to, and when it does, it doesn't ask for applause. I arrived at the venue 15 minutes early, not because I wanted to be polite, but because punctuality has always been my way of saying, I keep my word, even when they don't. Belmont Estate sat like a movie set. Perfect symmetry, manicured hedges, stone lions guarding the staircase. It was the kind of place people rented to convince strangers their lives had always been this polished. The kind of place where truth got replaced by floral arrangements and lighting filters. The valet looked confused when I pulled up in my 2013 pickup. Scrubbed clean, tires polished, not a scratch out of place. "Delivery?" he asked, blinking at the guest list. I smiled. "Nope. Guest." He checked the list again, brows furrowed, then gave me a parking token. I could have corrected him, could have told him I helped fund half the decor he was admiring. But I didn't, because what I came for didn't require fanfare. Inside, the venue pulsed with soft jazz, expensive perfume, and nervous laughter. Everything was perfectly curated. Rose gold flatware, creme linens, chandeliers made of hand-blown glass. The air smelled like money and manufactured joy. People walked around balancing champagne flutes like props, exchanging shallow words and air kisses. I walked in quietly, nodded to the planner with the clipboard, and handed her my RSVP. "Dennis Flores, table 18. She scanned the list, smiled tightly, and pointed to the back. I made my way through the maze of pastel dresses and tight-lipped approval. I wasn't greeted. No one paused their conversation. Even the bartender barely glanced up when I sat at the table near his station, close enough to hear the fizz of every soda gun pull. I had the worst seat in the house, and I sat there proudly. Because while everyone else looked forward to dessert and dance floors, I was waiting for something else. Across the room, I spotted Harper, glowing in ivory lace, posing for pre-ceremony photos beside her father. Ben stood a few feet behind, laughing with Mark and the other groomsmen, his smile a little too wide. He didn't notice me, or pretended not to. That suited me fine. I wasn't there to be seen. I was there to witness, to observe what happens when the curtain rises on a stage built from borrowed ego and credit card character. I watched as the planners buzzed around, fluffing napkins and straightening forks. I watched as Harper's mother whispered final reminders to the photographer. "Make sure to crop tight on the family shots. Crop tight, of course. No need to include the one man who helped make this entire illusion possible. The ceremony began just before sunset. Rows of chairs perfectly aligned. A string quartet tucked beneath a white arch wrapped in orchids and satin. I sat in the back, alone, with a clear view of everything. Harper floated down the aisle like she was gliding. Donovan walked her proudly, chest out, eyes glassy with emotion. Ben stood at the altar, like the prince of a kingdom someone else had built. When they reached him, I saw the way he looked at her, not just with love, but with relief, as if marrying her sealed the version of himself he'd always wanted to become, as if everything before her didn't count. And maybe to him, it didn't. Not the nights we spent sleeping head to foot in the same bed during storms, not the peanut butter sandwiches we shared when money was tight, not the time I punched a kid in the face in 7th grade to call him Ben's trash boy because Dad worked maintenance at the school. No, those memories didn't fit the story now. They weren't gold-trimmed, so he buried them. Buried me. The vows were short, perfectly rehearsed, not a stutter in sight. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the room exploded in applause. I didn't clap. I just watched, because I knew something no one else in that room knew, that while everyone cheered for Ben and Harper, their future was already tied to someone they didn't invite to the altar. Me. At the reception, I returned to table 18. The plates were already set. Chicken or salmon, no options. The wine was cheap, hidden behind the expensive labels. People at my table barely spoke. A woman in a blue satin dress glanced over and said, "You're Ben's." "Brother," I said. "Oh." She didn't speak again. When the MC called for toasts, Mark swaggered to the mic. "Ben's the kind of guy who makes things happen," he said. "He's not just a dreamer, he's a doer." I sipped my water, because I knew who had actually done the building. "He's loyal," Mark added. That one stung, because loyalty is quiet. It doesn't advertise itself at the mic. It shows up in the background, month after month, wire transfer after wire transfer, favor after favor, without needing credit, without demanding applause. I finished my meal in silence, watched people dance, watched Harper's father work the room like a mayor, shaking hands, kissing cheeks, nodding to executives, lawyers, old money families who'd known each other for generations. He glanced at me only once and nodded. The kind of nod that means, soon. I nodded back. Because soon was coming. People like Ben and Harper believed in moments, flashbulbs, spotlights, grand gestures. But men like me, we believed in timing. And the moment would come not with fireworks, but with a folder, a signature, a few simple words that would change the air in that room. And when it came, they'd all feel it. It happened between the salad course and the slow-roasted duck. The dining room buzzed with polite laughter and the clink of cutlery. You could feel the smugness in the air, polished like the glassware. I was nursing my second glass of water, no wine, thanks, and halfway through a tasteless Caesar when the room suddenly dimmed and the microphone squealed softly. The MC returned to the stage, tapping the mic like it might be asleep. "Before dessert," he said, "we have a brief word from the father of the bride." There was applause, enthusiastic, eager. Donovan Caldwell stepped up like a man born to speak. Custom-tailored jacket, pocket square folded just so, smile gleaming beneath dimmed chandeliers. "I'll keep it short," he said, holding up a hand, drawing chuckles. "You've heard the beautiful vows, the emotional toasts. Now comes the business part of the evening." Light laughter again. Guests leaned in. He glanced around the room, and then his eyes landed on me and held there. "Tonight, we celebrate not just a marriage," he said slowly, deliberately, "but a merger, a future, a foundation, both personal and professional. People began to murmur, unsure where this was going. I already knew. He lifted a manila folder from the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, turning slightly toward me, "I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge someone at this very table, someone who embodies work ethic, integrity, and vision. Someone who, after tonight, will be much more than family by relation. Dennis Flores, would you stand, please?" Chairs creaked, heads turned. All at once, the room froze. People looked from Donovan to me, the man at table 18, the man no one noticed, the one in the off-the-rack navy suit and scuffed boots. I stood, slowly, calmly, no smile, just presence. Donovan walked toward me, extended the folder, and shook my hand in front of everyone. "Welcome to the Caldwell Development Group, our newest partner." The room didn't gasp, not yet, because they were still trying to process what they'd heard. A few people clapped, awkwardly, unsure if this was a joke or performance art. Then I opened the folder. Inside, the signed contract, 50-50 partnership, 6-figure starting capital, a development deal already greenlit. And right there, Ben's signature on the witness line from a week earlier, because I'd asked Donovan to have it notarized, just in case anyone wanted to question it. And that's when it happened. Ben stood up, from the head table, fork in hand, face pale. "Wait, what? What is this?" Harper turned to him, confused. "What's he talking about?" Donovan didn't blink. "He's talking about a partnership with someone who knows how to deliver." The MC handed me the mic, uncertain. I didn't take it. I didn't need it. Because the room was already watching. And silence is louder when the truth is in your hands. Ben stumbled forward. "You partnered with him? Why, you said, I thought we." Donovan turned to him, calm as ever. "You thought wrong." The tension shattered like glass. A man at table 4 muttered, "I thought Mark was best man." Someone else whispered, "Isn't that his brother?" And then Harper's mother. She stood up, voice clipped. "Donovan, what exactly is happening right now?" "What's happening," he replied, "is I'm doing what you've never done, acknowledging the man who actually holds this family together." Ben was frozen, eyes on the folder in my hands. "You planned this." His voice cracked. I finally spoke, not into a mic, just loud enough to cut through his panic. "No, Ben, I didn't plan anything. I just accepted what was offered, without begging, without pretending, without needing to be the center of attention. You made sure I sat in the back. I was fine with that. But I never sat small." A ripple of sound rolled through the room, guests whispering, looking back at everything that had led to this moment. Harper's face was hard to read, somewhere between confusion and betrayal. She stood, folded her arms. "So what? You came here to flex? To embarrass us?" I shook my head. "I came here because I was invited. That's more than I can say for most of what I've paid for the last 2 years." Her mouth opened, then shut. Ben sat down, slowly, like his knees couldn't hold him anymore. Donovan returned to the mic. "To everyone in this room, consider this your introduction to the man behind the scenes, the one who didn't ask for recognition, but earned it anyway. Dennis Flores, my partner in business. And someone whose example more people in this room should follow." He raised his glass. "To integrity." People followed slowly. Some raised their glasses. Some just looked away. Because the room had turned. The energy had shifted. And the man they overlooked now stood at the center without ever stepping forward. I returned to table 18, tucked the folder beneath my chair, finished my water, and looked up to see Mark across the room, wide-eyed, holding his speech in one hand. I nodded once. He looked away. Smart. The air after the toast was heavy. No music played. No one touched their dessert forks. Even the string quartet seemed to hold their breath behind the curtain. It wasn't shock anymore. It was calculation. Every guest in that room was doing the math. Who sat where? Who was thanked? Who really made this wedding possible? And who had spent the last year pretending they did? Ben still hadn't stood back up. Harper was pacing, tight circles near the head table, her arms folded across her stomach like she was trying to hold her image together with posture alone. People were whispering, loudly. Someone 2 tables away said, "Wait, he funded the wedding? And they didn't even give him a speech?" A man at my table leaned over, suddenly friendly. "Did you really partner with Donovan?" I nodded once, calm. "We signed 2 weeks ago." He whistled softly. "Hell of a move." Then Harper's mother snapped. She marched up to Donovan with the kind of rage only rich people exhibit when their reputation is threatened. "You blindsided them at their wedding. Do you realize how that looks?" Donovan didn't blink. "It looks accurate. They're humiliated. Then maybe they should have thanked the man who made this evening possible, or at least invited him to speak." Her jaw clenched. This was petty. He smiled. A slow, polite smile, with nothing soft behind it. Number this was truthful. You're just not used to seeing truth in formal wear. Then it really unraveled. A woman in a champagne dress approached the head table and turned to Harper. "Is it true?" "What?" Harper snapped. "That your husband's brother paid for the venue, the food, the house you just posted about last week?" Harper's face went pale, then flushed. Her voice rose, not strong, panicked. "Of course not. That's ridiculous. Dennis offered to help once, years ago. This isn't his—" "I have the invoices," I said quietly from my table. Every head turned. "Line items," I added. "Venue deposit, catering, tux, rental, all paid from my account." Harper froze. "He's lying," she hissed, but it didn't carry, because she wasn't yelling at me. She was yelling to the room, to the crowd, to the people who used to admire her. And now they were watching her. Mark, the best man who replaced me, stood awkwardly, gripping the mic like it might shield him from the blast radius. "Let's move on to dessert," he stammered. "Maybe a toast to gratitude?" Someone from the bride's side muttered, "You had one job." Mark sat down. Smart man. Then the questions came, from both sides of the room, polite at first, then sharper. Why wasn't he in the wedding photos? Didn't Ben say he was self-made? I thought they had investors. Was the brother the investor? Why wasn't he best man? Why is the only honest person here sitting next to the bar? Ben finally stood, hands trembling. "This is not the time or place." "Then when is?" Donovan said quietly. "Because for the last year I've watched you ignore the one man who showed up for you every single time. You used his money. You used his silence. You used his loyalty. And tonight, he didn't expose you. I did. Because I'm tired of pretending image is more important than character." Ben looked at me, eyes full of something I hadn't seen in a long time. Shame. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered. I stood then, not to gloat, not to deliver a speech, just to say one thing. I didn't want a spotlight. I just wanted to stand beside my brother. But you made sure I sat in the dark. So I learned to see in it. That was it. I walked out of the room slowly. People parted without being asked. Some nodded, some looked away, but no one said a word, because the truth had already spoken, and there was nothing left to add. I stepped into the cool night air, unbuttoned my jacket, and exhaled. Not in relief, not in triumph, just in release. Behind me, the music finally resumed, but it didn't sound the same, because for the first time all evening, They heard it without distraction. It was just after midnight when I heard the knock. Not frantic, not timid, just slow, measured, like someone unsure of whether they deserved to be let in. I was home already, changed out of the suit, sitting on the back porch with a glass of water, boots off, sleeves rolled up, staring out at nothing. The silence felt earned. I'd left the wedding without ceremony. Drove home in the dark, the roads quiet and empty, like they'd made room for me. When I opened the door, Ben stood on my porch, still in his tuxedo. Jacket wrinkled, bow tie undone, face pale. His eyes were red, but he hadn't been crying. Not yet. We stared at each other for a long second. Then I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, like the house remembered him but didn't welcome him. And maybe it didn't. "I wasn't sure you'd still be up," he said. I was. He looked around. Everything was neat, clean, simple. The living room smelled like cedar and old leather, with a faint trace of wood polish. No catering smells. No chaos. Just home. He sat on the edge of the couch like a guest. Not like someone who used to live here. Not like someone who used to run through this house barefoot in mismatched pajamas. I didn't offer him anything to drink. I didn't need to. "You humiliated me," he said finally. The words landed with a thud. But I didn't flinch. "No," I said quietly. "You humiliated yourself. I just stopped protecting you from it." He opened his mouth, closed it. His hands twisted together in his lap. "Harper's furious." "Of course she is. Her parents are threatening to pull out of our next round. Maybe they should have funded the first one." He winced. Silence again. The kind of silence that forces you to sit inside your own echo. Finally, he said it. The thing he came to say. "Why didn't you tell me about the partnership with Donovan?" I stared at him, then leaned forward. "You didn't want me to speak at your wedding. You didn't want me in the photos. You didn't want me near the mic, near the head table, near the story you were writing. So I figured you didn't want to hear the truth either." He swallowed hard. "I didn't know you'd feel this way." "That's the problem," I said. "You didn't think at all. You were so focused on fitting into someone else's life. You started slicing people out of yours. Quietly, efficiently, like I was clutter." His head dropped. "You're right," he said. "I messed up." "No," I replied. "You made choices. And choices come with costs." He looked up, voice small now. "You were always there for me. Always. Even when Dad wasn't. Even when I didn't deserve it. And I treated you like a contractor." I didn't speak, because he wasn't wrong. "But you didn't just show up tonight to prove a point. You showed up because you still care." That one almost made me laugh. "No, Ben. I showed up because I was invited. And because I wanted to see the man you chose to become. And now I've seen him. Now I can stop wondering. Now I can let go." He stared at me, like those words were heavier than anything I'd said all night. He stood up, started pacing. "Is there any way to fix this? To go back?" I shook my head. "No, because you didn't just skip asking me to be your best man. You rewrote our story. You made me the footnote in a chapter I helped build. You used my money to impress people who didn't care about you. And when you had everything I gave you, you pretended I didn't exist." He sat again, slower this time, smaller. I didn't think it would go this far. None of them stayed after dinner. Everyone cleared out. The photos were awkward. Even Harper's maid of honor left early. I nodded. Truth tends to vacuum the room. He gave a soft, bitter laugh. "You always were good at one-liners." "No," I said. "I was just too quiet to interrupt your story." He rubbed his face, then looked up again. "Can we start over? As brothers?" No money, no business, just us. I didn't answer right away. I stood, walked to the mantel, and picked up a photo. The one of me and Ben at ages 12 and 6. His arm around my waist, his smile missing a tooth, my hand ruffling his hair. I studied it, then set it back down. We don't start over, I said. We start where we left off. And that means you show up without needing something. It means you listen, not perform. It means you rebuild this on something more than guilt. And it means I'm not going to carry you anymore. He nodded, not quickly, not performatively, but honestly. And for the first time in years, I believed him. I walked him to the door. The night air was cold again. The stars were bright. Everything felt sharper. He turned back, just before stepping off the porch. You were always the best man. I just forgot why. I didn't say thank you. Didn't say anything, really. Just nodded. And then I closed the door. Not loudly. Just firmly. Because love doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like boundaries. I didn't hear from Ben for a while after that night. No texts, no late-night calls, no sudden visits. And strangely, blessedly, I didn't miss them. For the first time in years, the silence felt clean. Not cold, not punishing, just free. I wasn't waiting for him to remember I existed. I wasn't checking his social media to see what version of our history he was curating. I simply let it be. The days that followed were simple. I spent more time at the office with Donovan than I had in months. We launched our pilot program for small business mentorship, and the response was overwhelming. Young founders, immigrant families, women over 50 starting late, all of them lined up with ideas and grit and none of the arrogance I'd grown used to funding. I gave them what I could: seed capital, strategy, quiet encouragement, no weddings, no spotlight, just real work with real people. And for once, I didn't have to explain who I was. I didn't have to prove myself. They saw me for what I did, not what I wore to dinner parties or who listed me in a speech. Donovan pulled me aside one afternoon after a long investor meeting. You okay? He asked. Better than okay, I said. He studied me a moment, then nodded. You've changed. I've stopped waiting, I said. Stopped hoping people will say what they mean when I already know what they feel. He smiled. That's freedom. And he was right. A few weeks later, I got a letter, not a text, not an email, an actual letter. From Benjamin. It wasn't dramatic. No 10-paragraph confessional. Just a simple note. I'm working on things, with Harper, with myself. We've started counseling. I'm not asking for a seat at your table again. I just wanted to thank you. Not for the money, for reminding me what a man looks like. I read it once, twice, then folded it, placed it in a drawer, not because I needed to keep it, but because it no longer had power over me. That weekend, I was invited to speak at a business roundtable for underserved communities. At the last minute, someone asked me to open with a personal anecdote. I hesitated, then told the story, our story, not with names, not with bitterness, just the truth. How someone once thought I wasn't successful enough to stand beside him on the most important day of his life, and how that same moment gave me back my voice, my vision, my self-respect. When I stepped off the stage, a young man came up to me. Mid-20s, button-down shirt, nervously clutching a folder. Sir, he said, I wasn't planning to pitch anyone today. But your story, I have to try. He showed me a business plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of heart. Full of something Ben used to have before the tuxedos and talking points replaced it. I handed him my card. Let's talk, I said. I don't invest in people who look the part. I invest in people who can lose it all and still stand back up. His eyes lit up, and I realized something. Maybe that's what being the best man really means. Not the one in the photos, not the one holding the rings, but the one who shows up even when he's forgotten, the one who stands back up after being seated in the shadows, the one who turns betrayal into boundary, and then into beacon. Because someone, somewhere, is always watching. And maybe my job now is to show them how to stand, too. The next morning I got another knock on the door. But this time, it wasn't Ben. It was my neighbor's son, 6 years old, holding a box of homemade cookies and a crayon-drawn thank you note. His mom had just opened her own nail salon with the funding from our program. "My mom says you're her hero," he said. I knelt down, smiling. "Your mom's the hero," I said. "I just got to cheer her on." He grinned and ran off. And just like that, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. No spotlight, no titles, just purpose. And sometimes that's more than enough.